Hi, I'm Maggie Taylor, and thank you for joining me today here at OPTIC. I'm really happy that the folks at B&H invited me to be a part of this year. And I'm speaking to you from my studio in Gainesville, Florida. This is my room that has all of my computers and some flat files with my art. And then separately in another room, I have printers and more storage because artists always seem to need more storage. Normally I'm here working all the time, just sitting, working in Photoshop on my images. So what I'm going to share with you today is a little bit of the history of my work and some of the things that I'm working on most recently, which I'm most excited about. So to start with, I'm going to back up to the 1960s. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I spent more time than most kids playing with dolls and dollhouses and watching TV. I was absolutely hooked on TV. Sometimes I could watch as many as 8 hours a day on the weekends because my parents didn't care and it was sort of like a babysitter. So I would watch all kinds of sitcoms. My favorites were Gilligan's Island and Star Trek and the Brady Bunch. So of course that kind of dates me. I didn't have a camera until about 1976 when my parents moved to Florida. And I've lived in St. Pete, Florida, and Palm Beach and a few other places over the years. But this was my first little bicentennial Instamatic camera. And what I wanted to do with it was photograph my pets, my little pet hamsters. My goal was that I wanted to wear jewelry with my pets in it. It was kind of an odd goal, but the whole reason I wanted a camera was so that I could put Leonard and Seymour into this little locket and wear it to school. From that point on, I was kind of intrigued by photography, but I didn't necessarily see it as a career path. I went to Yale and I graduated from Yale in 1983, and I had a degree in philosophy. But the whole time that I was there, I took photography classes. I loved working in the darkroom. We were only allowed to work in black and white back then, but what I liked to do was walk around downtown New Haven and in the suburbs of New Haven and just photograph quirky scenes in people's yards, like this little truck on the right being tied to a tree, and a little crooked bird bath, and the white paint on the trees. One of my professors in photography, Ben Lifson, asked me if I would be interested in going into New York to B&H camera store and getting a better camera. I had a rather old Nikon at that point that my dad had kind of beat up a little bit. So I said, sure. And he helped me pick out this really nice Plowbell Makina 6x7 that this was my camera then for, oh gosh, I had this for over 10 years. I loved this camera because it used medium format film, but it collapsed and it was light enough for me to want to carry it around. So I did love that. He also, while we were in New York, he said we could stop by and see the Daniel Wolf Gallery that was up on 57th Street. And I knew nothing about photography galleries at that point, but we went in and Daniel Wolf said, would you like to have a summer internship here and help me work on this book, The American Space? So suddenly I had the great opportunity of just moving into New York. I shared an apartment with one of my roommates from Yale and going to work every day in a photography gallery. It was the most amazing experience. And part of my job was cataloging a collection of mammoth plate prints that were primarily Carlton Watkins prints that later went to the Getty Museum. So it was just amazing to be able to be in the presence of these wonderful artworks and measure them, take notes on any imperfections in them, and write down what they are. It was really amazing. When I finished that summer, I knew that I wanted to go back to school in photography. But the problem was I didn't know exactly where I would go. So I took a year off and worked in a museum, and I ended up at the University of Florida. And even though I was from Florida, I actually didn't know where Gainesville was exactly. So this is something from graduate school, because once I got to graduate school, things kind of shifted and I was no longer interested in just wandering around with my camera. And frankly, there was a lot of pressure from teachers and other students to get more creative with my work. Everyone at that time was painting on things and making sculptures and getting into multimedia stuff. So I thought, I'll tell little stories with my work. I'll make drawings. I make these kind of crude pastel drawings, put them together with some little words and things that are from my own background. I also, while I was at UF, took my first computer art class. I had taken a computer programming class as an undergrad, and it didn't really appeal to me, but I took a class that was where we programmed each pixel for the color. So it took all semester to make 1 or 2 images. It was kind of a boring way of working. And so I couldn't see it being a sustainable way of making work at that point on the computer. Instead, I got a 4x5 old Crown Graphic View camera. And I thought this could be an interesting way to work. I just love objects, and I like to make textural backgrounds out of old bits of paper and just set them down in front of the camera and photograph them. So this is what some of that work looked like. The background on the right is actually a piece of color photographic paper with some Berg toner and salt and sugar and some other stuff thrown on it. And then I take it out in the sunlight, and you have about 20 or 30 minutes to photograph on it before it really starts to turn very, very dark. But I was amazed by the colors and the textures. I sort of think I should do that again and photograph or scan some of that as backgrounds. That could be interesting. And the image on the left is a double exposure. It's just the wings are there in one position, and I did half the exposure and then moved the wings a little bit and did the other half. It's very, very hard to do anything that creative in camera with color Type C film. It's just without getting really garish colors and stuff. So it was hard for me to try to think of what else I could do with these images. I was married. I got married right after graduate school to the photographer Jerry Yulesman, who was one of my teachers in grad school. And we were married for more than 25 years. And in 1996, I think it was, Adobe came to him and asked if he would make an image that they could use for a poster for Photoshop. I think it was version 2. I'm not even sure, 1.5 or 2. So he made this image with the help of George Jardine, who worked for Adobe then and came to our house to help us set up this Mac computer. It was much nicer than the one that we had had previously, and a scanner. So it was kind of a fun experience. And once we had a computer, I started experimenting with it more. This is another generation later Mac, but I had a room with all of my computer stuff in it, and I worked pretty much exclusively with the computer from that point on. It was kind of tricky. I mean, I had a lot of objects and stuff that I could put into things because of my still life work and all the stuff I had had from that. I had a lot of these flat files in my office here are not even filled with prints. They're filled with stuff. It's kind of fun. But galleries at that point, back in 1996 and 97, weren't so interested in showing inkjet prints. And honestly, I don't think the inkjet prints were that interested in being shown because they were kind of fading. So I came up with an alternative idea where I would make an inkjet print of something that could be the background, and then I would put a real thing on it and make a 4x5 negative of it. So in this case, the bird and the burning house and the textural background are all done in the computer in Photoshop. Then I printed out just a basic, like an 11x17 print of that and set a real chair on it outside in the sunlight and took a picture of it. So then what I would get is actually a Type C print. Later on, when the inkjet prints and iris prints came along and got a little bit better, I made this image, which was just purely a computer image. I don't go back and re-photograph it. So I was trying to come up with different ways of working and trying to figure out, could I still make Type C prints that galleries might want to sell? This was another one where the rhino toy is in real life sitting on this little inkjet print in the background. And the little pear is a cut out little pear on a piece of paper, casting a real shadow in the late daylight. It was kind of a convoluted way of working. Then later on, I realized, no, I should just make one that's purely a digital image. It's just totally in Photoshop. A lot of the stuff that I've collected over the years is photographic in nature. I have a lot of tintypes and carte de visite. I have especially a lot of tintypes because they tend to be rather inexpensive. And let's see, this is, well, these are a few of the images I used in Through the Looking Glass, my most recent book that I've done. So you see 2 of the girls here are very glossy and very crisp. Those are daguerreotypes in the cases with the red velvet. And then the others are tintypes. This one was an ambrotype, which is on glass. These are all from anywhere from 1845 to 1875 is the general range of work that I've collected. I like to actually own the images. So I search for them on eBay and then I do what I want with them. And I don't really know what it is that I'm going to do with them when I start out. You know, I'm really just kind of playing with colors, playing with ideas, trying to figure out what I want them to be doing and what kind of an environment they'll be in. So I worked this way, particularly with a lot of these old photographs from, I would say, 1999 until now, really. But some of this early work was used in various TV show openings. For example, this one was in Ghost Whisperer, where they put Jennifer Love Hewitt's head on it and made a video out of it. This was used as a book cover. This is the way an image started out with an extremely damaged daguerreotype. And this is the way she ended up looking. So it doesn't matter to me if I buy a less expensive daguerreotype that has a lot of flaws in it. I can use that. And I just really love the patina around the edges. It's always a surprise when you take something out of the case and you see what is under all those edges where there had been a little golden mat around it before. So I initially spend a lot of time retouching these. When I first scan them in and I don't know what I'm going to do with them, I just start to get to know the images, and I'll spend hours and hours really just going around the image and retouching all the little spots. Occasionally now I will even use some of those neural filters in Photoshop to play with someone's expression. You know, you can change someone's gaze and make them a little bit happier, a little bit older, whatever. It's kind of fun. This is the way these two ended up. The one on the left, the woman, is called Lullaby, and the one on the right is called Magnificent Obsession. I became kind of obsessed with making this doodle-like drawing that I think relates to her trees. Her trees are from an old engraving that I scanned in. And this is another iteration of the same two people. So sometimes I will reuse people and put them in an entirely different environment. In this case, these two are the White King and the White Queen from Through the Looking Glass. The White Queen is kind of forgetful and loses her shawl, and she's living backwards in time. She has a lot of issues. The White King has always got his little notebook with him. Early on, when I started doing this kind of work, I realized that it was easier for me and quicker for me to use the scanner than a digital camera. So I kind of made the choice that most digital cameras were a bit expensive for me, and I'm really not so much of a camera person anymore. So I like to use the scanner as a camera. And to do that, I just put objects directly on it and leave the top of the scanner open. This is a little bird that had flown into the window of someone's car in a Walgreens parking lot. And I just brought him home in a baggie and put him directly on the scanner. He was still kind of a little bit flexible. And then got different poses of him, which I've used multiple times. He's been usually a bluebird in my images. Sometimes I used to go to PetSmart, haven't done it lately, but I would go to PetSmart and get some little fish. The mornings, they usually will skim out all the little dead fish in there. The only thing is they made me sign something to say that I wouldn't return any of them and pretend that I needed my money back. I'm like, no, I just want the dead fish anyway, because I don't want to be responsible for an aquarium. So this little dead fish, which I thought was kind of nice looking, ends up being in this image here. Those fish were scanned ages ago, like probably back in 2000, but I still use them. They're still pretty good quality scans. These days, I also will use my cell phone camera. So I have an iPhone camera, and like the newest iPhone, and I do like that. I've been getting flowers at the farmer's market recently and taking them to in front of my white shower curtain in the bathroom and photographing them. But I also still scan them. If I have a nice object, something that I'm interested in, I usually do both, scan it and photograph it, because I don't really know exactly what angle I want. If you've got the flowers, you might as well scan them, photograph them, and then put them away in a folder on your computer so that next time you want to make a still life, you can. Oh, this is an example of how I put scanned and photographed flowers together in one bouquet. Some of them, frankly, looked better on the scanner and had more detail, and some of them were a little too three-dimensional. So I had better luck with them with my iPhone camera. And then I scanned the lemon, I scanned a little shell, I took a photo of a glass and pieced them all together. When you look at something like that up close, you do kind of see that the quality is different. You get different kinds of artifacts on a scan than you do on a photograph. And that kind of interests me. I'm putting a bit of a texture over everything as well. So many times I'll take just a corner of an old photograph or something that has an interesting texture and put that as a semi-opaque layer on top of everything else, almost like making a decoupage or something. And this one is called The Experience. In this case, I had to scan in a lot of drawings of butterflies and moths, and each one had to be cut out separately and sized and placed in the image. I did the same thing here with bees, actual carpenter bees that died. Sometimes they drill these little holes in houses here in North Florida. And I just found a bunch of them one day and decided they're dead already. I'll put them in different positions on the scanner so that they can end up looking like a lot of different bees and put them into this image. So this image is actually more than one tree. I didn't like the texture of the one very lovely tree that I saw out in a field and photographed. It just didn't look dimensional enough or interesting enough to me. So I put a second tree on top of it and put a mask around it so it fits inside of the first tree. And then I put a third tree in there just for more leaf texture. Each one of those layers is semi-transparent and in different blend modes. So it kind of amazed me how it built it up and made it look more painterly in a way as a tree. I normally just work on whatever image it is that strikes my fancy, whatever I have in the computer that seems like the next thing that's going to be intriguing to me. And every once in a while, I've taken on an outside project or really a particular project. I did a series of illustrations for Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, and that was back in 2005 until 2008. I worked on this series of 45 illustrations, and that was published as a book. Later on, I decided after like a 10-year break that I would really like to go back and work on Through the Looking Glass. So that's my most recent book that was published in 2018. And both books are with all of the original text. That was important to me to have all the original text in there. And my working process for this was just going back and reading and rereading obsessively the text and trying to include each of the characters. So many people have seen the various movie iterations of these stories, but they don't really do it justice. There's so much more in the text. There's so many other characters in there that are forgotten. So it was really fun. And a lot of both of them, particularly Through the Looking Glass, is poetry and songs within the story that have all kinds of fantastic characters in them. So this is the Jabberwock monster. These are Tweedledee and Tweedledum as they're preparing to have a little battle. They're very civilized about it, and they're going to go and sit down and have tea or dinner at a certain time. They're going to have to stop for that. They know that, but they're just kind of two wonky, crazy fighting twin brothers. That was a fun one to work on. This is the lion and the unicorn. So in some cases, I work on these images for 6 to 8 weeks each. If I'm lucky, I can finish something in 2 to 4 weeks, but usually it's a laborious process because I have to be happy with it. And you can see there's so many little things, little details like shadows for each individual element in the funnel coming out of this dog's head and his elegant little collar that comes from a painting. So I'm getting things from multiple sources. These are all 64 images that were in Through the Looking Glass. The reason I made 64 is that the central motif of the whole story is chess. So you have the kings and queens and pawns and all different characters actually align with particular chess players. So I thought there should be the same number of images as there are squares on the chessboard. This is an image that went with the opening poem. So it didn't necessarily have to have any particular character in it because the opening poem isn't really about any character, but I decided that I wanted to include this weeping willow tree. So the tree has this cute little face. Well, it's not so cute. It's actually a little sad, and one little tear coming down on the cheek. And this is the final poem's image where they're sort of sailing off into the distance. And this is an image from that series where Alice is in a strange outdoor space that turns back into a shop of an indoor space of some sort. And all the trees around her suddenly start turning into furniture. So this set of trees turned into this chair. And then up on the shelf in the distance, you see a little faded out egg, and that is Humpty Dumpty. So then in the next scene, she talks about Humpty Dumpty. This is Alice and the White Queen. You see them reflected in the water. There's Alice on the right, who the Queen keeps referring to as a little goose, a silly little goose. And the White Queen herself morphs into a sheep and then back into a White Queen again. And the background here actually is very near where I live, outside of Gainesville, Florida, on a really lovely river. So when I can, I like to include photographs from my own environment. I'm always collecting clouds and water and ripples and things like that to put into the work. I had to do a banquet scene for the end of the story, and I left that for the very last because it was going to be really complicated. And I am much better at simple images with just one element or two people. And this idea of a banquet with a whole bunch of people sort of scared me. So I took this image from it's an old engraving, and I stretched it out to be my square format, which I just always have loved square. And I started to piece in and audition some different characters there, see which Alice is going to look good, which animals would I want to have in there. So drawing from everything else that I had already made, I was able to work on this to be the final image and try to include most of the cast of characters in there. But it was really tedious, and I couldn't quite figure out what the table would look like. After working for a couple of days on it, putting different things in there, I got to this point and I kind of liked it. I thought it looked a little bit like a drive-in movie theater in the background or something. And I took some of my grandmother's old dishes and put them on the table. At some point, I also had silverware for all of them and little champagne cups for all of them. And then I got to this. Sometimes I'm flipping things on and off in Photoshop and the colors change kind of dramatically and surprise me. I kind of like this, and I thought I might be done. I like the way it has a little bit of a sheen of an oil painting in the background. And that's because I photographed an oil painting in a museum that had a particular shine on it and just used that. It's not a painting of anything. It's just actually a blank area in a portrait. And this is the girl that I thought I would like to use as the face of Alice, because I hadn't used this one yet, and it's a very nice daguerreotype, but I didn't really want this clothing on her. I photographed a painting that had this clothing on 3 different women. Well, actually, it's a painting of 2 women, but I've doubled the one on the other side to make the White Queen and the Red Queen symmetrical. And then I took the faces that I had used in previous images for the Red and White Queen and had them with Alice. So then I placed them in the background and realized maybe I don't need a table at all. Maybe it's nicer just to try her dress, which is this elegant gown, becoming the tablecloth, and put their stuff on the table in that way. So you can see why these would take kind of a long time to work on. This one is from a scene in the book where the White Queen tells Alice that sometimes she can believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. And I love that scene, but I wasn't really sure how I was going to depict that. I love this Salvador Dali painting, which exists down in St. Pete, Florida, in the Dali Museum. It's a very small early painting, but I just think it's always stuck in my mind. It's just so elegant with this row of small objects in the foreground, and then the people-sized objects in the middle ground, and the monumental building-sized objects in the distance. So I thought I want to use that as my role model. And that's how I came up with this. So you could say, well, they're not 6 impossible things, they're 9, but I think the things on the table are not impossible. The things on the table might actually be the breakfast, is what I was thinking. So I get inspired by art a lot. If I'm in New York, I like to go and photograph in the Metropolitan Museum and other places with art. It's almost like a visual diary that I can keep stuff like that in folders and go back and look at them. This is the start of an image where I had been in a museum in Europe and photographed this painting in the background. Actually, it's 2 different paintings pieced together. And in that particular museum, there was a window behind me creating this really awkward glare on the painting. But I decided I actually kind of like that. It obscures the people a little bit. So you never know what kind of accidental thing you might find in an art museum. So I started to work with the idea of making a sort of Dutch still life painting, Dutch still life digital composite, I guess you would say. And I tried some different options for it. I always try so many different things, and it takes days and days before something kind of clicks. Once I put this window in here, I decided I really like the way that makes the space feel. I've got to put a ceiling of some sort too, and a table. And then I'm going to take those masks out of there because they weren't really working. And I liked all the moths. Maybe it was a few too many. But the biggest problem I had at this point was I didn't exactly like my choice of flowers. So that would mean I need to get more flowers and start over again with a different bunch of flowers. And I'm really glad that I did. It was time consuming, but I like these flowers so much better than these. Some of these individually were okay, but this grouping just has a lot more going on. And again, I am such a poor photographer. I would not be able to take all of these and put them together in a real bouquet and photograph them. I just wouldn't be able to do that. So this is the way I like to work. You can see that there's a yellow and orange zinnia in the center left, just above a blue flower that has a different quality to it. It almost has like white pixelated edges. Well, that's because it's a pretty poor quality JPEG that I put in there, but I happen to like that flower. Meanwhile, the center tulip that the little bee is on is really, really beautifully detailed, and that is put on the scanner, just like that. The little fish that's in the goblet in that image, I decided that he looked a little bit boring, and I've used that fish before. So in order to make him a little bit different, I picked zinnia petals off of one of the flowers and put the zinnia petals one at a time on the scanner, scanned a bunch of them in, and then placed them on the fish. So he's covered entirely in digital zinnia petals. So, and I call that the alchemist chamber. It was really fun to work on that. And I'm very happy with the way the lighting and the mood of it kind of are. But it just takes a long time. It takes weeks and weeks to really become comfortable with an image and decide what is it that you want to say with that image. The biggest problem I think that people have is trying to work too quickly on something and thinking that you can finish in a day or two. The more you revisit something, the richer it's going to get. So that's the way that I like to work. Here's another painting that has always amazed me ever since I studied it in art history class. This Velázquez from 1656. It's Las Meninas, and it's the Spanish royal court, the princess in the little white dress. And the painter himself, Velázquez, is the man on the left painting this giant canvas. And supposedly what he's painting is the official portrait of the King and Queen of Spain. And we see them reflected in the background, possibly in that brighter mirror-like frame in the center of the painting. So I decided what I want to do is take that room and strip everything out of it, take the people out of there, which you can kind of do by carefully cloning and using content-aware fill in Photoshop, and then put my stuff in there. So I put some of my own images into the frames, or at least some of the backgrounds and little bits from my images into those frames. And then instead of a painter, I decided the little girl will be the painter. Instead of being the subject of the image in the way that she was, she's also the actor that's going to be making the painting. So in my mind, she's making a painting of her little dog. So in the brighter mirror-like image in the background, we see how she's painted her little dog with a crown on because she loves it so much. I have been spending some time in the last few years in Mexico, both in Mexico City and in San Miguel. And I have some really good friends who live there, and I have a gallery that shows my work there. So I found the colors started to filter into my work. And I don't know, for some reason, I had come back from the Day of the Dead there, and I ended up with this image, which to me has kind of a vibrancy and a color and a feel that relates to some of the artwork that I had seen there. And in the background here in the hallway is a little Whistler's mother type of character that I put in there with a different face on her. Another thing that I'm collecting is daguerreotypes and photographs of artwork. People back in the late 1800s didn't necessarily just photograph other people. There's all kinds of other stuff that you can find out there in these wonderful antique images. So this is a double exposure daguerreotype of a statue that actually exists in multiple copies. This was a very well-known statue back in the mid 1840s. It's a statue called the Greek Slave that's supposed to be a Greek woman who was enslaved by Turkish people after a war. And it was an image that it was very much written about at the time, and abolitionists loved this image. So I thought I'd like to make something with it. And this is actually a double exposure daguerreotype. So the photographer took the image of one and then went to the other side, or turned the statue, I guess, and took the other one. So it's the same statue 2 times. And I don't know, it just seemed really photographic and special to me. Plus the fact that one of the copies of this actually exists in the Yale University Art Gallery. And I used to walk by it on the way to my art history classes all the time. So it just really rung a bell with me, and I wanted to do something. So I had this celestial map, a very old constellation map that has some of the zodiac signs and other quirky little constellations illustrated in kind of a funky way. And I thought I'd like to put that on them as their clothing in some way, and then perhaps make a third woman be in the image with them. So I took a different woman from a Lucas Cranach painting that I had photographed as the middle woman there, and then covered them with a little bit of seaweed like they just came out of the water. And I think of those as sort of the 3 graces or the 3 muses. And I had to cut each individual element out of the star chart and kind of play with them a little bit. But when you look at it up close, it's kind of fun that it has all these different, it has Capricorn and Leo and all the different ones in it. I love to photograph animals, but photographing real live animals is not my specialty. I'm not so good at that. So I really like to photograph taxidermied animals. And I found the most incredible place about 6 months before COVID. I was in Paris, and I went to this wonderful natural history museum there that's just chock full of taxidermied animals in the most bizarre parade you could imagine. I found so many things that I could photograph there. I just used my cell phone all afternoon, and I knew I could use these for something. So I thought, I want to have characters to use to start with as a template. I'm not sure if I don't know if I want these faces, but I want to have some clothing that's very simple like this, and put 2 people into a room together. And I used, again, one of the photographs I took in a museum in Germany, where I've got that weird sheen from the oil painting because the light coming in the window is interfering there a little bit. And I started to think about what will be coming out of these people. Like, would each one have a totem animal? That was my first thought. And then I realized it might be more interesting if each one had more than one totem animal. And I happened upon this, which is an odd old painting that I photographed by a lesser known artist, but quite old, of these weird Hieronymus Bosch-like characters. It's not Bosch, but it's someone that was his contemporary that has these weird, creepy little fighting monsters and things flying in the sky. So I thought, I'll put some of those little things up in the sky. And then I thought, no, I don't want to use someone else's little things in the sky. It would be better if I made my own. So I kept a few parts of some of the little bits there, but mostly I've got my own shark and my own party hat and my own flag on the one guy. And so it was kind of a fun little thing to work on. And at this point, I decided I don't like the faces. They're just not very engaging. So what I would like to do, perhaps, is take some other faces, other people that I photographed from paintings in museums. I like the young girl's face on the top right here, but I also don't like her hat that much. I like the bonnet on the lower face there. I like the hat on the boy in the top left with the black hat, and I like the face and the eyes on the other boy better. So I pieced them together and ended up with this combination. And from that point on, I knew I was pretty happy with the image. I realized maybe the strange ostrich foot on the boy was a little bit off-putting. So I kind of thought maybe I'll take that out of there. And I needed a third little element in the foreground. So I made this other odd little homemade Bosch-like character. And I think this is almost the finished version of it, but then I decided I wasn't loving the green so much. So I went back to just yellows and blues in this case. Many times it's the last thing that I do is trying to decide on the colors for an image. And this one started out, I thought it would be a still life. Why not just take an egg and put it in front of an interesting texture of a painting? And it could just be that simple. But then as I worked on it, I thought, no, I want to put some other little story in there. Maybe the egg is going to have some arms, have like a little character to it. I don't know why, but I thought maybe, it could be gesturing up at this nice little cluster of butterflies. The butterflies are from an antique engraving. And if you want a great website for finding stuff like that, there's a thing called the Biodiversity Heritage Library that has the most amazing stuff, free, royalty-free online. And if you look up Biodiversity Heritage Library, they have a Flickr account too, where you can quite easily go through a lot of these albums of photos. And it's just really fun. There's a vast amount of material you can get on the internet just to play with. If you're interested in trying some collages like this, I highly recommend it. And there's also a museum called the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam that has a fantastic website. It's spelled RJIKS, which is an odd spelling, but RJIKS Museum. And they have a thing called Rijksstudio. So I kind of like the idea with this image that we're not really sure if he's going to, or she is going to climb up the ladder to get to the butterflies or what. I like to garden because I need to step away from the computer sometimes. And if I find something particularly beautiful in the yard, I photograph it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I can tuck it away in a folder full of flower images, and then I'll see what I might want to do with it. I also have a lot of quirky art stuff in my house, just objects and things that I've collected over the years. These 3 little sleeping pigs live in my living room, and I thought I'd like to make something with them. So last year, once we started sequestering at home more and more, I tried to just look around my own local environment. Just what do I have here in the house that I've never photographed before, and try to think what I could do with it. So I took some of these magnolia images and came up with the idea of trying either a ring of them on the ground around a little sleeping pig, or better yet, a ring of them up in the sky. Why not try some stars in there too while I was at it? So I thought the idea is the little pig is sleeping. And then I wasn't so sure if I liked all those magnolias there or not. I thought maybe I'll try it with just some butterflies. No, then I brought back the magnolias. I decided I did need them. And I've got a little bit of a painting in the background here that gives sort of a sense of distance. I like the idea of combining indoor and outdoor spaces together. So this checkerboard floor is definitely indoors, but then little boy fishing on the rock is outdoors. And as I was working on this, I realized that I had not photographed that little pig very well. Actually, I didn't even dust him off, and I was noticing there was dust on him. So I made myself go back outside and photograph all 3 of the little pigs, first of all, to make sure which one of them I really liked, and then also which one was going to look better from which angle. Once I did that, it opened up a whole different idea to me of keep both pigs in there. You don't just have to have one, like let them be sharing a little pillow. And that's sort of like staying at home alone in COVID times to me in some way. I don't know. So that was the finished version of that image with a slightly simpler background. This is another one from just this past year. So I've been kind of productive staying at home and working. I'm getting ready to work on my next book project. So some of these images will go into that eventually. A lot of these have a kind of art history reference to me, and I took a lot of art history in college. As I said, I love museums. I love to include things, but I don't necessarily want to just include someone else's painting as it is. I quite often alter them and in this case, I put my own butterflies in there, and I substituted in one of my own magnolias in there. And once I put the magnolia in there, I realized, oh, magnolia crown for the monkey will also be really good because that will tie in with the flowers in the painting. And I think of it as the monkey is doing a self-portrait here in some way. You can see on the typewriter, the little image that's being cranked out is the monkey with the magnolia crown. So he's kind of like phoning it in as a selfie. And this was an image that I made to print on metal. Every once in a while, I don't make inkjet prints. Normally, I make all my own inkjet prints here, but I actually thought I'd like to make a print on metal to put outdoors by my swimming pool. So I thought it's got to have a swimming pool theme in some way. So this is what I came up with: two people getting ready for a swim, and the guy's going to jump off the fish. And I put the ripple, instead of putting the ripple around the fish, I put it up in the sky. I thought that was kind of interesting. This is an image called Morning in the Gallery, which also includes a lot of those little art history elements. And once I put the fish head on the woman, I thought, well, why not try a fish head on her dog? I really like the way the dog looks a lot. I think I'm going to reuse that character in another image. And this one is called The Bath. Sometimes I try to work on something that's either just a still life or just a room, something a little more simple, and take all of the human elements out of it. I mean, there's the reference of humans here. There's like steaming water in the bath, and there's a strange portrait of a cloud-headed person on the wall, but there's no person in the room. And there's a really nice clawfoot tub, which I made from an engraving of a bird and then a photograph of a taxidermied bird. So just collecting and piecing things together is basically what I like to do. In this case, I photographed what would you call this? An antique diver's suit that was in a museum in Paris. And I had to hunt to find it. Someone had told me about this wonderful old Jules Verne type of mysterious diver's suit, which doesn't even have a face like a glass that lines up with the person's eyes. Instead, it has multiple like oculi all around it that people can look out of. What a bizarre idea. So I knew I wanted to use this suit for something. And I thought, well, I might as well duplicate it and have two of them. So at least the one has a friend down there at the bottom of the ocean. And it took a while to kind of figure out what sort of a breathing contraption they would have and what would be around them. But as I was working on it, it came to me that I would like to include all kinds of debris down there that's down at the bottom of the ocean, and we don't exactly know why. And then up on the iceberg, you have the polar bear there that's, I guess, coaching them or talking to them or something. I'm not really sure. I don't intend for there to be any one particular meaning for any of these. They're just open to the viewer's interpretation. This one, I worked on for quite a long time, and I kept changing out the different animals in the boat before I was happy with it. And this one is called The Burden of Dreams. It was a pair of images. They were pretty popular. I did them back in 2012. And since then, I've been looking and looking and looking for more profile images. It's very hard to find 19th century profile images. And finally, this year, I found this tintype of the woman on the left and this carte de visite that's on a sort of a cardboard-like paper of the man on the right. And I decided they have an interesting neutral look. And remember, these old photos were really made at a time when they were long exposures. That's why people aren't really smiling. They were probably blinking, and you don't see eyelashes because they had to hold still for 30 seconds or so for the exposure to be made. But I kind of like that about them. They have a sort of dreamlike quality. So I thought I'll try some different animals in there with them, or perhaps like a totem animal again. And when I put this boat inside of the woman, I decided, actually, I like that better than an animal for her. She's going to have some animals up in her head, perhaps, and all kinds of other stuff going on in her head. And these were two images that I worked on simultaneously, which was kind of fun because you could bounce back and forth. When you got tired of trying to figure out items for the man, you could go and work on the woman. But kind of what happened was I got too many items in the woman and couldn't figure out what was going on with the guy. So eventually I decided he will have a scale down inside of his head, and it will be weighing this kind of canary in a coal mine. And maybe we need even some other little element for him up on top of the scale. So I put this little Bosch-like monkey with a mask on top of his scale, a little blue monkey with the tail hanging down. And then he's got a crying fish and the globe. So I ended up thinking toward the end of working on it that his name, the name for the image of the man, would be The Weight of the World. And there's only one element between the two images that's the same, and that's the little pocket watch that's stuck on 1111. They both have that in them. So that's the finished version. But you see how many times I changed my mind on their color for their clothing and so on. Should they be black? Should they be really neutral? What color will the background be? Do they have to exactly match? And so on. So it's a lot of test printing goes on here in my studio, I would say. This is the final one that I'm going to show you that is a fairly new image. So these guys I made back in 2009. And I have a friend here in town who's an architect, and she asked me, why hadn't I ever made an image of two women as architects? So I thought, well, that could be interesting to try to work on. I'll have to cast my characters and find out which women I have that I might want to use, and then figure out what could be architectural about them. Would their skirts be buildings? Would there be buildings in around them? For a while, I kind of like an idea of scaffolding all around them. I found this woman on eBay, and I knew that I really wanted to use her because I love her dress. I don't love the big white collar, so I had to retouch that out of there. And the dangly necklace, I got rid of that. And I put her in as the woman in green on the left. And as I was working on it, maybe this is like 4 or 5 days of work at this point, I decided I really don't like what's going on with those skirts. Maybe it's worth trying a glass skirt of some sort, just making my own shape and pretending it's sort of like a bell jar, and put something architectural or even music-like in there. I wasn't really sure. Maybe they were going to morph and be nothing to do with architects. And then I decided part of the problem might be that was too much going on in that image. So just one person in there might be enough. And I separated her from that other background, put her here in front of this more painterly background. This has some clouds that I photographed with my cell phone, and it has a painting that I photographed and retouched some stuff out of. I just wanted a feeling of a distant landscape without any real subject in it. And I thought, I'll play with some different ideas for her skirt. Simplifying is usually a good idea. And at some point I saw on Instagram, and I love Instagram just for getting ideas and stuff. There's all kinds of stuff out there. I saw this chatelaine, which is a 19th century item that a woman would wear on her belt. Particularly a housekeeper could wear it, like the housekeeper in Downton Abbey has one. And in that case, it might have keys and smelling salts and powder and a tape measure and so on, or a thimble. More affluent people would wear a sort of affected looking one that had all kinds of other jewel-like items on it, sort of like meant to be practical, but maybe not really so practical, more decorative. So I thought I'd like to make something for her that would be dangling off her belt. I don't know what objects I would put on it though. So I tried a mirror and a bottle and a magnifying glass and a mini tape measure. At some point, she ended up with a house on her head, which I think is an interesting idea. And I might do something with that in the future, but not for her. So I worked quite a lot on making her dress beautiful and putting a pattern. And I scanned in a necklace or several necklaces that I have just to have a chain, and then kind of made the chain have that drape to it, like it's hanging down there. But I really wasn't happy with the way that was going. It was a little too random looking, the way the chains were falling across the fabric. And then I realized, well, there's no reason why it has to be on the outside of her dress. It might work better if I put it on the inside of her dress. Then each chain can just be hanging very vertically straight, and I can put all my wacky objects on there. They don't necessarily have to make sense as a chatelaine. There's thread, and there's a tape measure, there's a key, but then there's a lemon and a pig and a turtle shell and some other stuff. Sometimes when you're working on things, this is one of the biggest tips I will tell people who are going to work on something like this, you can get to the point of overkill. It is very easy to just keep adding. And at some point in the process, you must become an editor. Take everything back out of there and decide what is important to you. So I took it back down to this, and I realized, well, I like it better with this nice checkerboard floor. I like it better without those columns in there. Simplifying was good. I put my own arms in there because I decided I didn't like her arms. So these are my arms with a black danskin long sleeve shirt on. And then I just made them a different color in Photoshop. And then I thought maybe what this is about is she is going to be a nesting doll, and she's inside of a larger nesting doll. So if she has a checkerboard floor inside of her, and she has a curved background with perhaps that same painting in the background of her skirt there, when you look inside of her skirt, then that implies that she's inside of some other nesting doll with a dangling chain with a few items on it as well. And this was so much fun to work on, all these different little layers and stuff. But once I got to this point, I realized there needs to be then a third little nesting doll inside of her. So way inside on the bottom left, in a very miniature size, there's another little woman that has tiny objects dangling inside of her skirt. So I call this one the logic within. And in the next book that I'm doing, there's an essay that's written by a friend of mine, Mark Sloan, where he talks about how it seems like what I have to do is keep working and working and working on an image until somehow there's some kind of an internal logic for that image itself that comes out. Something just kind of occurs to me there. And it's like, yeah, so that makes sense. I definitely didn't start out thinking this is going to be a nesting doll. No, I started out wanting to make two architects, which is a totally different image. And who knows, maybe that's one that I'm going to have to come back to in the future. So this is the last image that I will share here on my keynote. And this one is something that started out where I wanted to make this interesting contraption that would be weighing a cloud in some way. And then I needed to put some other element on the other side of the scale, and I wasn't sure what exactly it would be. And it happened that I was searching around for stuff on the internet just for ideas of how much does a cloud weigh. And I found a really interesting article that said a cloud of about 1 cubic meter weighs the same as a mid-sized monarch butterfly. And I thought, wow, I'm glad I just read that, because that would be quite interesting just to have the balance be between this cloud, which is heavier than you would think it would be because it contains so much moisture, and then the little butterfly. So that was kind of a fun one to work on. It has some elements of paintings in the background. It has a photograph of the grass in my yard in the foreground, and then all kinds of other little layers adding texture and color in there. So now what I'd like to do is open up my Photoshop for you and show you something about the layers in that image of the woman with all of the little objects. So then are we going to do something different with the setup? Okay. So here I have opened up the image that I showed you of the woman with all of the little things inside of her. And just to give you an idea, sometimes when I'm working on these things, they can have hundreds of layers in them. And I like to try to keep them organized and name each of the layers. Otherwise, I'll kind of lose track of where they are. I like to be able to search for some of the layers by their name. But if I turn off everything except the background layer, this will show you, this is that sort of a room with a little bit of a baseboard. And it was actually a tintype with a person in it, but I retouched and did content aware fill and got rid of the person. Did I do a perfect job there? No, it's a little blotchy and funny looking, but I knew that I was going to be putting my main subject in that space, so that's okay. Then I have a lot of other background layers in there. I have this nice, what would I call this? A painting that is actually just a portion of a painting. If I put it on normal, we have different blend modes in Photoshop. And if I put it on 100%, you'll see it's just an image of a painting kind of back there. And the clouds are actually on a separate layer. And I'm not worried about what's going on in the middle here because my woman is going to be standing there eventually. If I turn the mask off on that painting, you can see actually in the real painting, it went down to an area with a tree in the foreground even. So I'm masking things and I'm changing the blend modes and I'm organizing, because if you don't keep them organized and keep all the layers separate, you won't be able to find things and change things. You'll get really frustrated. So then what else do I have in here? I have something called the best big floor. And that is actually my bathroom tile floor. And I've just altered the colors a little bit. if I show it just plain, it's just really a boring white tile floor, and I've changed the colors of every other square. So it's not really even a checkerboard floor. There are so many amazing things that you can do in Photoshop, building patterns and stuff these days, but I like to photograph real floors if I can. And I kind of like the idea that it came from my house. Now there is a mask on that floor because I didn't want the floor to show up too much underneath the woman. That's why behind the woman in her dress, I had to make sure that we weren't going to see those checkers. Now, if I come up to where the woman is and turn on some of her layers, well, let's just start with her. Here we have her body, and that does not include arms because I did not particularly like the arms that she had. And what is her body made up of? Oh my goodness, it's quite a lot of layers. And she has a separate section of things for the lower body and skirt. And what is the skirt? Well, it's simply a pattern that I found somewhere on an old book. It was like, let me turn that one on by itself. It was inside the cover of an old book. There was this strange little pattern. And I thought, well, that actually could be interesting to scan and use for something. It sat in my computer for a really long time before I ever figured out what to use it for. So every layer has a nice little mask on it, if it needs it. And as we go up, 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 and turn on more of those individual layers for her, we will eventually find there's her bodice, which has some different color layers. I use a lot of adjustment layers in Photoshop. These are all adjustment layers. Some are for curves, which darkens or lightens something. Some are for hue and saturation that's going to affect the color. And the reason I like them all as these sort of non-destructive adjustment layers is that I can change my mind. Who knows, when I make a first print of this, I might decide I want the whole dress to be pink instead of this purpley color, you know? And so there's just all kinds of magic that you can do within Photoshop. And I have a Mac. People always ask me, like, what do you use? I have a nice Epson scanner that I like quite a lot. That's a kind of mid-range scanner. And it's a V850, I think is the one I have now. It's not big enough for giant objects, but it's pretty big. And I like to work with a Wacom tablet because it gives me better control. Sometimes the mouse frustrates me. I will use a mouse for a few things once in a while, like making raindrops or something. And let me find where my little woman, but you see, I just wanted you to see how many different layers there are in here. And if I can turn all of the layers back on for a second, all off, all on, and zoom in for just a minute here to where we see all of this stuff. So each one of these little guys is on a separate layer so that I can pull them out of there and reuse them for something else in the future. Yes, I do have to flatten the whole image in order to send it to the printer because this is over 2 gigabytes in size. So I definitely have to flatten it. But for example, let's say I want to take this little dog in the future. I want to save one version of the image that's going to be just the little dog and his chain because I might want to use them in a different image in the future. And each one of them also needs to have an appropriate shadow if it's casting a shadow on one of the other elements. It's so much fun, though, to just work with all these different little things in Photoshop. And there's the inner lady with her. She has a bottle and a chair and a ham and a tassel and some other stuff inside with her. So that's pretty much the way that I work. It's very time consuming, but it's fun. I don't think that you have to learn how to do every single thing in Photoshop right in the beginning. You kind of learn as you need to do something. And the great thing nowadays is on the internet, you can find so many tutorials, you know, whether it's on like YouTube or LinkedIn or so many different places, you can get great information. And if you need to learn to make a shadow, Google it and find out how to make a good shadow in Photoshop. And then that will kind of stick in your brain once you've needed to learn to do that. That's what I would recommend to people. So if you're just new to compositing, don't feel like you have to make something this elaborate. Start maybe with one person and learning to make a shadow and putting that person into an interesting environment. So thanks for sharing this time with me. And I hope it gives you a little bit of inspiration and stay creative.